is there a universal site for finding FPMT teachings on the web?
That's a really good point. I don't think there is, David, but it sounds such a sensible idea.
See to it then, please.
Good idea. I mean, that would be pretty big because it's about 170 centres.
Yeah, okay. But
so,
I mean,
okay, no, but right. There are, I'll tell you what, there are certainly every. But what's interesting, David, is now that with Zoom, more and more things are changing. Centres are starting to kind of join in together to have, teachings. So I think the old model has always been all these individual centres in individual cities around the world. They have their own websites and their own courses. Then the very least you can do is you can look on FPMT and you'll see a list of all those centres. There's a on the FPMT website, as you must know, there's a page that shows you all the countries and every single country. There's that, but there's not a universal website, and I can't even imagine how that could be, because if it's made me think about that. Many of the, like for example, the centre I'm in now in Santa Fe, the director here, and we've been talking, and they've got now they're using about 20 of the FPMT teachers from around the world, because it's all on Zoom. It's easy instead of having their one and only 2 teachers. The same with the New York Center. They're using teachers from different centers. So that's, I think, the next step. But to have one that's universal with all of them, that's a really interesting concept. I mean, it'd be quite complex. So that's a good point, though, David. Very sensible. I'll think about it.
I can't help.
I know, there you go. But I like ideas like that. So let's think about it. I'll think about it. Thank you, David.
Thank you.
Okay, people, let's go. Our last 2 hours together. In our discussion of how to get out of your samsara, how to climb out of samsara into nirvana. Basically, that's what we're looking at. So we're looking at it from the point of view of the fourth noble truth, which is the solution. The first is what there is suffering. There are 3 levels. The second is there are causes. The third is it is possible to get rid of suffering and its causes. And the fourth is how to do it. And the way we're using it here, the solution, is the Lam Rim. So junior school and high school. Junior school is the way to stop the first kind of suffering. High school is the way to stop the second kind of suffering. And realizing emptiness, which is taught in the Bodhisattva path, is the way to quit all suffering altogether. So we've talked about the first 2. Now let's look at the third one. How to uproot suffering completely. So as we talked about in the, in the second noble truth, the causes, as we can see, the whole universe is run by this law of cause and effect. We know it's called science, but Buddha's expertise is in terms of causes of happiness and causes of suffering. That's his expertise. That's one way of framing the entire Buddha's path, So his particular method is very fascinating. His solution, his explanation of why we suffer is quite interesting. It's quite unique. It's not the external world definitely plays a role. It's definite when a person is kind to you. You can say that that's one of your causes of your happiness. Someone was kind. And you can definitely say when a person's mean to you, that is one of the causes of your suffering. Well, what Buddha has done, as we know, is pinpoint the cause, the root cause. As far as he is concerned, the root cause is what goes on in our mind. And so what that means is, speaking simply, all these conceptual stories, these opinions, these viewpoints we have, including all the neurotic emotional ones that like anger and attachment and jealousy, they're also viewpoints. They're also conceptual stories. So it basically, Buddha says, we're living in la-la land in relation to how things exist. And as odd as that sounds to us, that's his explanation of exactly why we suffer. So therefore, the method to stop suffering and the method to get happy is to radically reconfigure our conceptions, to radically reconfigure our views of the world, of I, of me, of where we come from, who we are, what is the mind, what is happiness, what is suffering. That's what Buddhism is a detailed worldview, basically, of as far as he's concerned, how things exist, both conventionally and ultimately. And basically what he's saying is when you bring your mind into sync with how things exist, when you have only in your mind valid cognitions, when you only your mind is rid of invalid cognitions, these neurotic conceptions, that's when you achieve your nirvana. And you add bodhicitta to the mix, which is an incredible way of continuing to reconfigure your mind, you're going to achieve Buddhahood. And that's the final goal as far as the Mahayana view is concerned. So Buddhism is a method. It's definitely a system of ethics. It is definitely a method for stopping suffering and getting happiness. And it is definitely a system of wisdom, getting rid of ignorance. And they all come together You can't have one of those without the other. This is the key thing in Buddhism, you know. So the final job to do is to completely, radically reconfigure the contents of our mind. That's the way to put it, I tell you. But first, like we've been talking in junior school, you got to control the servants of the mind, the body and speech, which are actions we do based on misconceptions, actions we do based on attachment and anger and all the other delusions. You know, this is the analysis Buddha has. So let's look briefly then at Bodhichitta, which is another way of continuing to work on your mind. And then that culminates in the perfections, which culminate in the wisdom, in achieving the final wisdom, where we learn to recognize the ultimate way that things exist, thus cutting the root of all suffering and its causes. So bodhicitta, this Sanskrit word, or mostly we have English words, you know, for all these Tibetan, Indian phrases, but somehow bodhicitta seems to be the one, you hear people translating it, and it is translated literally as awakening thought, or, you know, but somehow it's, I don't know, I continue to use the word bodhicitta, you just kind of give it that meaning, and it grows its own flavor, you know. So the first stages of practice are living from your mind all the neuroses, all these emotional afflictions that cause so much pain and suffering. And even to the degree that you've got some renunciation, you haven't cut the root completely, you'd be a pretty amazing, stable person, pretty content, fulfilled, joyful, loving, compassionate, wise. You'd be pretty amazing. And then, like I said, if you're on the Hinayana path, you would then complete that path by realizing emptiness and then quit samsara altogether. But if you're on the Mahayana path, you would carry on into the compassion wing. And basically what you're going to continue to do is, this never stops. You will continue to work on your mind, but the difference is crucial. In the first stages of practice, you're working on your mind to get rid of the delusions because you're sick of suffering. Now you continue working on the delusions, but it's from a different perspective. It's from the perspective of breaking down the barriers that these delusions have constructed between self and other. Because on the Bodhisattva path, you're trying to completely eliminate this falsely created conception of me and you, both with bodhicitta and then with emptiness. So the main enemy, you could argue, in the first levels of practice in junior school and high school, the main enemy is called attachment. This primordially I-based, fear-based, neurotic emotional hunger that completely misconceives the causes of happiness, completely misconceives what happiness is. So ends up causing more suffering. So the main beneficiary of this practice is, of course, you. So here the main emphasis of practice, and this is related to the vows of this level of practice, which are called the vows of individual liberation. These are the vows of, the whole path is the path of refraining from harming. Now in the compassion wing, the emphasis is on the morality, on the ethics of benefiting others. So the emphasis here, you continue to work on your mind. That never ceases from here to Buddhahood, but the reason is different. Now you're trying to cut down. The main enemy is called self-cherishing, which is a very nice phrase, but it's just another word for it in our culture, selfishness, putting yourself first. So selfishness is a consequence, you could argue, of attachment. And they're both just different ways of putting the main problem as a result of the root delusion, which states and believes in an intrinsic separate self. So the main emphasis in the first stages of practice is to be cautious, to not harm others in order to protect ourselves from further future suffering. So we practice restraining from harming. Here we are practicing continuing on the mind, but in order to break down these artificial barriers, in order to be able to get this incredible level of compassion, which then culminates in this outrageous kind of paradigm shift in the mind, where now others only arise in your mind. When you've actually got this bodhicitta, not just flimsy moments of it, but an actual realization of it, then there's no longer the thought of I. There's no longer the thought of getting anything for me. It just doesn't arise in the mind. This is inconceivable to us, but this is what bodhicitta brings, you know. And it's a powerful, courageous state of mind that finds on the basis of incredible compassion. So the unique characteristic of the compassion of the bodhisattva path is like this, you know. If you're on the Hinayana path, and your goal is to graduate at high school. to get out of samsara, to quit samsara, to achieve your own nirvana. That's your goal. So as you progress along that, to get that goal, life after life, as you lessen delusions and lessen attachment and lessen anger and lessen harming and grow your mind, and you also now start to realize emptiness, you're driven by this incredible wish to get the hell out of samsara. You've got incredible renunciation, and you want to get the hell out of samsara. So how would you be when you got to that point in that particular life, when you do finally achieve your nirvana at some point? How would you be? You'd be a mind-boggling person. You'd be incredibly blissful and radiant and clear and kind and no attachment and no anger and no depression. All the delusions gone. But you'd be incredibly kind, incredibly loving, incredibly powerful, an amazing person. But when you die, because of your goal over many lifetimes, the programming in your mind for your goal to get out of samsara, and then at the end of your life, the bliss you experience overrides your compassion. And then you won't come back because that's been your goal. You go into bliss. So the Hinayana teachings, actually, if you study in Thailand and Burma, they will tell you your mind will stop altogether. Mahayanas have a different view. They say your mind won't stop. Your suffering will stop. Your rebirths will stop, but you'll stay in a state of subtle bliss for a long, long time. And then one day or other, one life or other, Buddha will come along and tap you on the shoulder and say, okay, baby, it's time to get out of this bliss and come back onto the Mahayana path and become a Buddha so you can benefit others. And I heard one Lama say to give up that bliss is the worst suffering in the universe. It's very interesting. Now, if you're on the Mahayana path, your goal is to graduate at university, not high school. So what drives you is your goal for Buddhahood. So even when you go through the same stages as the Hinayana practitioner, at some point you might even not need to come back. But when you die, your compassion, and this is called great compassion. This is the unique characteristic, and I'll explain it. But your great compassion and your bodhicitta, I must become a Buddha to benefit others. That overrides your bliss, and you'll keep being reborn, and you'll complete the path of Buddhahood by bopping from life after life after life, benefiting sentient beings and perfecting your mind. And in one life or other, you'll achieve Buddhahood. But by that point, you'll never stop being reborn. By that point, even the lowest level bodhisattvas have the ability to manifest their mind in 100 bodies simultaneously. By the time you're a Buddha, that's inconceivable. So why you override that bliss is because you've got great compassion. And that's the unique characteristic of the Bodhisattva path. So what's compassion? Compassion is a thought. It starts with a thought, and it's defined as a thought that when you see suffering, you go, oh my God, look at that suffering. I wish they didn't suffer. That's compassion. And that grows limitlessly to what Lama Zopa calls unbearable compassion. But then the unique characteristic of the Bodhisattva path is this one called great compassion, which literally a technical term, Sanskrit, maha karuna, great compassion. And that's the one that not only do you have compassion, my God, look at that suffering, but great compassion says, what can I do to fix it? That's, His Holiness would sometimes call it universal responsibility. Sometimes I think Lama Zopa calls it, maybe it's a slightly different phrase, I don't know, a slightly different level of mind, I'm not sure. He calls it the special attitude. That's the unique one of the Bodhisattva path. It's this personal sense of responsibility, like a courageous person for whom the whole world is their children. Like a mother, she would never doubt for a second her role in relation to her child. Your child could be drowning. She'd have unbelievable compassion, but she wouldn't be looking around wondering who's serving her baby. Even if she can't swim, she knows it's her job. That's great compassion. This powerful sense of responsibility that it's my job. That's the huge difference. That's the unique one of the Bodhisattva path. So we need to get that in order, all of these stages you go through, starting with equanimity. We'll discuss that briefly. These are the stages. As we know in the Lamrim, there's these different packages of teachings that culminate in bodhicitta. One is called the 6 causes and 1 effect, and one is called the exchanging self for others. And this is this. So in Pabonka Rinpoche's liberation in the palm of your hand, he has a technique, a series of 11 techniques that combine both of these. So the first of these is called equanimity, and this is a really powerful one already. So let's talk about that. This is not, so this is, so okay, equanimity is really powerful. It's the first stage, it's the foundation upon which you will develop love, compassion, great compassion, and eventually bodhicitta. So this is the start. So it's very interesting. Equanimity, to be very specific about, often we're very wishy-washy, but each of these states of mind is a very specific one. Each practice is very specific. So equanimity when you've got it, is this heartfelt recognition, that enemy, friend, and stranger, and there's no fourth category on this planet. Enemy, friend, or friend, enemy, and stranger, this is exactly what it is, are equal to each other from one point of view. They each want to be happy, and they each don't want suffering. Buddha would say this is what drives every being in the universe. This is something fundamental, the wish for happiness and the wish not to suffer. So the point here is this: why is this the basis? Because right now we divide the universe into friends, enemies, and strangers. We mightn't use the word enemy, but it's the object of these are the objects of the three root delusions. So friend, by definition, is the object of our attachment. So that person seen through the lens of my attachment will seem beautiful, will seem lovely, my beloved. And as long as they fulfill my attachment's needs, they will remain in the friend category. So that means I will have love, and I will have compassion, and I will have generosity, and I will have all the virtues, but those virtues are usually only for that category. Look at the world. We don't question that. Well, Buddha's just telling us that's really limited. It's based on attachment. It's unstable, as Lama Zopa says. It's got strings attached. Because you know perfectly well, when that boyfriend gives you up for a younger version, he moves straight out of the friend category into the enemy category. Now he's the object of your aversion. Of course, unless you work on it, that's what he'll be. He'll be the object of your aversion. You have anger towards him. He's now in the enemy category. And what happened to your love, kindness, generosity, forgiveness, compassion? Turned off like a tap. This is normal world. No one questions this. We call that normal. So then so in other words, the friend is a person who does what your attachment wants. An enemy is a person who does what your attachment doesn't want. The third category, who are they? That's 99.9999% of the universe, and they're called strangers. And what are they? They neither harm nor help us. So how do we feel about them? Complete, total indifference. I mean, this sounds always brutal, but we analyze the world, we will see exactly this is how it is, and everybody's the same. Your monkeys, your dogs, your humans, your animals. We have our friends, we have our enemies, and we have our strangers. We can see this. And these are the objects of the three main delusions, the three poisons. So in the first stages of practice, we're learning to let go of those three poisons in terms mainly of not harming others, being cautious, and not stuffing in too much cake, and not jumping on too many girls, and all the rest and all the rest. We're trying to calm down the body and the speech, which are the servants of attachment and aversion, and control all of that. Here, we're trying to lessen, put atomic bombs under the three poisons in relation to sentient beings. So this equanimity is not just some gooey feeling, oh, everyone's the same, like that. It's not like that. It's a very specific attitude that really demands cultivating, and needs logic. And this is the point about all these meditations. In all these meditations, they're not just close your eyes and have wishy-washy feelings. You're using clear logic to argue with ego's absurd misconceptions. So they need logic because they're so entrenched. We believe so strongly in the misconceptions. We need to use logic to argue with them, which is quite brutal. But we have to have that. So equanimity is a starting point. But why? Because right now, the status quo is, okay, because we want to try and develop love and compassion. For whom? Well, Buddha says for everybody. And that's shocking to us. What do you mean for everybody? We have lots of love, we have lots of compassion, but it's usually only for the beloveds. This is just the normal world. No one's surprised by that. And we have aversion for those who are mean to us. Nobody's surprised by that. Okay, we might want to drop bombs on them, but we don't want to have them in our life anymore. They're angry, they cause us suffering, we blah, 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 And the strangers, we just assume a stranger is a person you don't care about. Nobody's surprised by that. Buddha says, I'm sorry, but this is really limited. This is artificial. This is wrong. This is a misconception. This is a bunch of labels we have dumped on the world that have no logical basis. So we have to disprove this illogic by using logic. So this very first step, it sounds so simple, but it's quite profound. You've got to get yourself out of the equation, basically. So then, even as we're talking, trying to use different logical arguments to prove this point, even as we're talking, we imagine right in front of us a person who we don't like, a person who's annoyed us, upset us, a person who's been really mean to us, a person we haven't forgiven. We'll call them enemy right in front. Imagine them right there. Then to the left, your beloved. If we have any right now, we adore, who do what we want, who we love, they're lovely to us, we lean towards them, we are attached to them, they do my attachment wants, they love me. That's a friend, nothing wrong, it's wonderful. So then to the right, you have a stranger there. To put their face there just enough that you've maybe seen them once, but you have no interest in them either way. There's no attachment and there's no aversion. So that brings indifference based upon the fact they've neither harmed nor helped me, not in this life anyway. So when we realize these are the three categories and you see these three people, basically you're getting yourself out of the equation to attempt to see logically that these three people, from their point of view, has nothing to do with your stupid labels. Of course, that person is your beloved, but that person in their bones, wants to be happy because they want to be happy, and they don't want to suffer because they don't want to suffer. Now look at the enemy. The enemy, the enemy is true. It's a person who's harmed you, but in their bones, they're exactly the same as your friend. They've got nothing to do with you. You're seeing them through your lenses. Take away your glasses, take away your lenses, and you're going to three separate people. Try to see them separately from you. In fact, we see the entire universe through the lenses of these three delusions, which is incredibly self-centered. I mean, we should be embarrassed at how ignorant we are. We see the entire world in terms of whether we like them, we don't like them, or we don't care. I mean, it's automatic. It's so profound because the three poisons run us. So I always tell this simple little story, reading my New York Times one day in my iPad, and there down in the right-hand corner, there was the heading, 350 people die in ferry accident in Tasmania. Well, I'm an American, I'm Australian, I'm English, but also my bones, I'm an Australian, I was born there. So that's my people. I went, oh no. I looked and it said Tanzania. And I went, oh, that's okay. I mean, of course it's not okay, but I caught myself immediately. I started to think, oh, where's Tanzania? What are these people? Because I don't know, they're strangers to me. Tasmanians are my people, Tanzanians are strangers. So I caught myself, of course I did, but it was automatic. Because we've got attachment, aversion, and this particular function of the root delusion, ignorance, this function is this indifference, one of the consequences of ignorance. This is how we see the world, default mode. There are some kinds of people we like. Like, for example, there might be some jazz fans and you go to a jazz club. Well, they're your people. You might go to the football. They're your people. We have a category we have a label for categorizing our people. It can be different in different scenarios. They're people who all like the same thing. And then specifically among our friends and beloveds, the friends are those who fulfill my attachments, needs. And it's on that basis that I do love them, which is, may you be happy. And that I do have compassion, which is, may you not suffer. They are very strong for us. So let's just look at an example. Let's say, who have I got here? Let's say, Teresa is a friend of David's. And Teresa's my friend as well. And I don't know David. And she's telling me how this poor David gets terrible migraines. And I try to be sympathetic, but I don't know the man. And I try to be sympathetic because it's Teresa's friend. And I'll say, oh, that's awful, the poor guy, does he really? And then I'll say, pass the sugar, please, Teresa. And we forget all about David because he's a stranger to me. I'll try to have sympathy. We know this. You get my point? We'll try. But it doesn't last long because he's vague to me. He's out there. I vaguely know his face. Maybe he's the bloke who lives down the road, but I know nothing about him. And this is even just saying these words shows how limited we are. He's just this vague person to me because he hasn't touched my life. So that's what a stranger is. So naturally, we're not moved by the experiences of strangers. Of course, more and more these days, we read the papers and we do have empathy sometimes, but just generally speaking, we understand this. And no one's surprised by it. So what happens when I meet David? Let's say we fall in love and he moves me in to his number 7 down the road, let's say. Suddenly, David, we know this, moves overnight from stranger category to friend, doesn't he? Now, let's look at how I feel about his migraines. I've got unbelievable compassion. Robina is so compassionate. She spends her money on doctors. She sits up all night trying to help him. She loves him so much because he's got these headaches. Well, excuse me. He had these headaches before he knew me. I couldn't have cared less. He could have dropped dead. I didn't care because he didn't affect my life. Suddenly, because my life is now affected, suddenly because David adores me, suddenly I've now got compassion for his headaches. But excuse me, this is the logic now. The stranger does not want suffering in exactly the same way as my beloved doesn't want suffering. It happens to be last week he was a stranger and this week he's the beloved. But what's the difference? David felt, if you ask David from his point of view, having nothing to do with Robina's relationship, David is David is David. He doesn't think, oh, I'm a stranger, I don't care. Oh, I'm a friend. He doesn't think that way. He's just David with his headache. He feels exactly the same when he's labeled stranger as he does when he's labeled friend. So it shows that my labels are completely artificial. It's got nothing to do with whether he wants to suffer or not. I've only got compassion for David because now he's my beloved and he cares about me. I mean, we're self-centered. We should be shocked by this, but we don't question it. It's quite shocking. The logic of equanimity is to recognize that all the people I don't know feel exactly the same way as my beloveds. Okay, David might be a saint and the last boyfriend I had might be a monster. That's not the issue here. We also judge, that's the point, we judge our ability to love somebody or have compassion for them on the basis of that we think they're a nice person. So if you don't like Mr. Trump's politics, you'll be happy if he's got a headache. So it's got nothing to do with the person. So this is why we've got to get ourselves out of the equation. This is what this equanimity is. It's profound. And this is the first of the 11 points that culminate in Bodhichitta. It demands really clear thinking. So how do you put this in daily practice? Well, let me say you're a grandmother and you've got this divine grandchild who for you is like a saint. You adore your grandchild. Perfectly fine. How lucky he is to have you. But let's say your grandchild plays with a smelly kid next door whom you can't stand. He's mean, he's rude, he picks his nose. So automatically look at the difference. You're the two of them playing. There's you looking at your little grandchild like he's a saint with this shiny light and divine and beautiful. And there's a smelly kid. I mean, this is so evident. We never think about it. Look at the picture you are painting of the ugly kid and look at the picture you're painting of your beloved. And what paints those pictures is attachment and anger. It's very simple. But we don't think that. We think it's truth. We think there's ugliness coursing in the veins of that smelly kid, and we think there's deliciousness coursing in the veins of our little beloved grandchild. This is how we see the world, and we don't question it. So your grandchild might be kind and that smelly kid might really be horrible. That's not the discussion here. This is the crucial point. It's not the discussion here. The discussion is very bare bones. That Mr. Trump, that smelly kid, the stranger, and your beloved are equal, identically equal, from that one point of view, that they're driven by the yearning to be happy and they're driven by the yearning not to suffer. It's very primordial. It's very fundamental. That is equanimity. So that's hard. That is the first of these 11. This is pretty intense. So once you've got that, beginnings even of intellectually, already you've got the basis upon which you can grow valid love and valid compassion. Right now, we do have love. We do have compassion, but it's contingent. It's not stable. It's got strings attached. I love David as long as he keeps making me happy. I have compassion for David as long as he keeps making me happy. We don't say it like that, but the proof is when he chucks me out and moves in with Teresa now, he'll turn into the enemy category. First he was a stranger, I couldn't care less. Then he was a friend and I adored him, and now I hope he suffers. He's now an enemy. We see this, we do it all the time. It's like playing chess. Keep moving people into the 3 categories, all based on our own self. We ought to be embarrassed at how self-centered we are, but we just think it's normal. So this is already profound, analyzing this one. So how do you practice it? You're watching the kids, and the little kid, the smelly one, might even be mean. So you've got to watch him. Be careful, you watch him. But you've got to recognize right there, Robina, he wants to be happy. He wants to be happy just like my beloved. And straight away, you're even able to see those words. You start to make him human, not just this ugly object. And this becomes the basis of wanting people to be happy and wanting them not to suffer. Because love is, may you be happy, and compassion is, may you not suffer. It's primordial, it's fundamental. That's just the first step, you know, and you gradually grow. They have all these different techniques you grow, and it culminates in bodhicitta. And the technique that we all know they use finally is the one where the shift happens, is this amazing practice called Tonglen, you know. And then it culminates in this amazing, outrageous bodhicitta. This unbelievable. I mean, Lama Zopa, when he talks about just what bodhicitta is and what you'd like if you have it, is inconceivable in our normal world, you know. Unbelievably powerful, brave, courageous, who truly sees everybody, who truly wants everybody to be happy, who not just that, but has wisdom that sees their minds and knows exactly how to help them be happy. You're not a Buddha yet, but you're on the way. Really amazing. So then you get to the 6 perfections. And then basically from life after life after life, you're perfecting this bodhicitta, growing it and growing it and growing it by meeting sentient beings life after life after life, perfecting the first 4, and then the last 2 on your meditation cushion, where you are perfecting your insight into emptiness, where you cut the root of all delusions and thus achieve, and then thus remove the subtlest level of suffering, all pervasive suffering. So let's look at that now, the 6 perfection, the last 2. Concentration and emptiness. Okay, so in the first stages of practice, we begin to control our body and speech, but we start to understand here dependent arising. Dependent arising is the king of logics, Lama Zopa says. Lama Yeshe says, paraphrasing Tsongkhapa, it's the king of logics to prove emptiness. So we're going to look at the 2 truths: conventional existence, ultimate existence. For Tsongkhapa, this is the best way to prove emptiness, the best way to understand, to get insight into ultimate reality, which is what cuts the root of all suffering, which removes the 3rd level of suffering and all the others. So, okay, so already we're preparing for that by doing junior school and high school. In junior school, we begin to understand dependent arising by understanding karma, because karma is the first example, a brilliant example of the first level of dependent arising, which is that everything comes into existence in dependence upon causes. So suddenly, by abiding by the laws of karma, this helps start to loosen the grip of ego grasping, because we're starting to understand cause and effect of me. In the second scope of practice, we start to look into the way the mind works, and we look in particular to the way the delusions work, and we see how they're all misconceptions. They're all conceptual stories deep in the bones of our being that we believe in totally. So we begin to unpack those misconceptions. So this prepares us to really now understand the root misconception, to see how it is a misconception, which is a bit of a surprise to us, that it's a misconception, you know, this root delusion, this root affliction, this root, you know, neurotic state of mind, which is the cause of all suffering. So, you know, in this last, we need to get insight into this. But we first have to get concentration, shamatha. Why? Because your mind gets laser-like and sharp. You can't do this analysis that's necessary to realize emptiness until you have got shamatha. As Lama Yeshe says in his Mahamudra book, it is impossible to realize emptiness, at the subtlest level, to unpack and unravel in this sophisticated way the way things exist, and to see the reality until you've got the subtle level of mind. It's impossible. So you need concentration in order to get insight, the 5th and the 6th of these 6 perfections of the Bodhisattva. So, okay, let's look at emptiness. What does it mean, and how do we start to realize it? How do we exist? This is the way of describing, it's the shorthand for how things exist ultimately. The shorthand for how things exist conventionally, and the 2 together are the 2 truths, the king of logics, to prove emptiness. Dependent arising is the shorthand for how things exist conventionally. The word emptiness is the shorthand for how things exist ultimately. So right now we've got the 2 extreme views, Buddha says. So when we hear the words, like the way Lama Zopa would put it, when we hear the words that this I, for example, or that thermos, for example, all phenomena have, from the side of the phenomenon, from the side of the self, there's not one atom of anything there that makes it what it is. There's nothing intrinsic there. There's nothing inherent there. There's no inherent selfness there. There's nothing there that you can point to. This, naturally, we hear Oh, there's no I. Might as well throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's the extreme view of nihilism. As Tsongkhapa says, we fall into the abyss of the great mistake that emptiness means nothing. This is the worst mistake and the commonest mistake of understanding emptiness. It's the wrong one. It's the worst mistake. Falling into the abyss of the great mistake, Tsongkhapa says. So then we hear that something does exist as a dependent arising, that the conventional reality is that there is a thermos that does exist and depends upon causes. Three things: dependent upon causes, dependent upon parts, and finally, dependent upon the mind that calls it thermos. These are the three levels of dependent arising we could argue roughly that Buddha is using to argue with positions that were prevailing at the time among all those amazing Hindu thinkers and yogis from which he diverged. So the first level of dependent arising, that things exist depends upon causes. We begin to get that when we think about karma, that I am the product of my causes, not someone else's. Second, that things exist depends upon their parts. So this is a delicious argument. We should look at this one. This is not the subtlest meaning yet, but it's a really good analysis to do. So what Buddha is saying is this. So first of all, before we start discussing a phenomenon, an object, a thing, we should define what it is so we can all be on the same page. So here we're going to discuss the object called self, the phenomenon called self. So the word self, person, I, me are all synonyms. A dog is a person. A dog is a self. A dog is an I. A human is a self, a person, an I. A Buddha is a self, a person, an I. They are synonymous. So we all know that we're an example of that kind of phenomenon. We're not a bed lamp. We're not a toilet. We're not a couch. So we say each of these words and we need to be on the same page. That means we need to label something, we need to define it accurately, and then we need to prove that it does function as we define. This is a really crucial thing. You need to know what you're talking about. Once we've established something as existing conventionally, once we've defined it and we've fulfilled it and we've shown that it fulfills the function, now we can begin to discuss how it exists ultimately. So part of our problem, though, is we don't even get the world right, even conventionally. And you could argue the entire path up to now, emptiness, we're discussing conventional reality. We're sorting out conventional reality. So karma, the Buddha says, is a view of how things exist conventionally. Impermanence is a way of things existing conventionally. The mind not being physical is a way that it exists conventionally. All the nuts and bolts of all the path up to emptiness are the presentation of conventional existence. So we at least got to get that right first. We don't even have conventional reality right, Buddha says. We're not even, forget about ultimate. So we've got to get conventionalities right first. Okay, so then we can discuss how it exists ultimately. So let's discuss the phenomenon called I. Well, the second level of discussion that Buddha is arguing with, roughly speaking, is that this ignorance in our mind, this root delusion, known colloquially as ego grasping, this root delusion, of the three, the root one, of which attachment and anger are voices, are expressions. This root delusion, this ignorance, that's its actual word, maripa, ignorance, but it's got a really specific function. And when we understand this, we'll really get the point. So ordinary ignorance is easy to fix. I use these examples, and I'll just keep a simple example again. If David says to me, Robina, what color is that? And I'll say it's pink. He'll say, no, Robina, silly, don't be ridiculous. It's black. And I go, oh, God, I'm so silly. Of course it is. It's black, No, it's a wrong example. Sorry, it's wrong. I was using something else. That was another example of something else. Okay, sorry. I believe it's pink. I believed it's pink for so long that even when I look at black, it appears pink to me. Let's just pretend, okay? Now, the first mistake is simple ignorance. If he says to me, what's that? And I'll say, I don't know, what color, what is it? What is it, David? He's like, oh, it's black. That's ordinary ignorance. Simply saying, I don't know is ordinary ignorance. Now, that ordinary ignorance is easy to fix because there's nothing in the mind that's contradicting it. You just simply don't know. So I think we could get enlightened if we had that simple ignorance. But we have got double trouble ignorance. Not only do I not know the truth that it's black, I believe in a lie that it's pink. So you've got to rip out that lie in order to get to see the truth. That's the ignorance we've got. So this marikpa, this ignorance, simply doesn't know. Not only simply doesn't know the ultimate way my I exists, that is to say, it's empty of existence, of intrinsically existing. We'll discuss this concept. Not only do I not know that reality, that's a reality, Buddha says. Not only do I not know that, but I believe in a lie that's exactly the opposite. Not only do I not know that there is no intrinsic I, this ignorance causes me to believe with absolute trillion% certainty since beginning this time that there is an intrinsic I. So this is the problem. Ordinary ignorance is simple. I'll become enlightened in a couple of years if we have ordinary ignorance. This is the problem with this ignorance. Not only do we not know the truth, we believe in a lie. This is why it's so painful. And we are addicted to these lies. We are completely obsessed with these lies. They've been in our mind for so long that everything appears to be this way to us. So it's incredibly hard to even understand it. You know? I mean, even attachment is bad enough. That's a branch delusion. Attachment in my mind causes the cake on that plate to appear unbelievably delicious. I mean, we know that, but we don't join the dots. That view of my mind, attachment, is so intense that I have no sense that cake appears to me through the lenses of my attachment. I just believe that it is existing that way on that plate in itself, as if deliciousness is like you put a spoon of deliciousness into it along with the chocolate and the sugar and the flour. That's because we've believed for so long. But the lie is that it's our mind making that up. That's Buddha's entire point. That's just attachment. So the root delusion, which underpins attachment every second, that root delusion causes the cake to appear intrinsically delicious. Attachment causes it to look delicious. Ignorance causes it to look in itself delicious. Like I said before, actually I said it wrongly before. Attachment makes it look delicious, but ignorance mixed with the attachment, informing the attachment, makes it look intrinsically delicious. When that cake is if that cake is disgusting, I hate it and I vomit if I eat that cake, it will look, aversion in my mind will make it look disgusting to me. And the ignorance informing that aversion will make it look intrinsically disgusting to me. When I'm in love with David, attachment makes David look divine. We kind of know this. But ignorance, marikpa, informs that attachment and makes David look intrinsically delicious. Finally, this is merely labeled, finally meaning delicious in himself, like I said, as if deliciousness is coursing in his veins along with his blood. That's how everything appears to us, one way or the other. Everything appears back to us, as Lama Zopa says, in the aspect, they say in Buddhist psychology, of what is in my mind. And this is every millisecond. So we're completely sucked in by these lies. And this is the root lie, the root lie. So not only do we not know that there is no intrinsic I, no intrinsic delicious cake, no intrinsic ugly David, not only do we not know that there isn't, that that's not the truth, but we believe in the lie. So it's no wonder it's hard work. It's intensely hard work, unpacking and unraveling these misconceptions in our mind, you know. So we should be very humble and kind to ourselves and go slowly, one step at a time, very precisely, very clearly, very detailed. The secret is in the details, especially now when we're going to get to understanding emptiness by thinking about dependent arising. This is the king of logics, and here we need much clarity about detail. The second analysis is that this ignorance causes us to believe totally that there is in here somewhere, among all the thousands of parts that make up Robina, all the parts of the body and all the parts of the mind, this ignorance causes us to believe with absolute certainty that there is a very special part in there, a very special part, like the boss part, that's called, that part that walks, like my friend Pende says, that walks hand in hand with the other parts. That part, that special part, is called I. This is one major mistake we make. So we have to use logic to prove that there, not only that there isn't such a separate, independent piece in here called I, but we don't even need one. We've made it up. This sounds so hilarious, doesn't it? So let's try and prove it, okay? I use the same arguments all the time. I mean, one I'll use the same. Yeah, we'll do different analyses, okay? So here's one analysis. They say in the text that, this is a really extensive analysis we need to use. If there is something existing, it's got to either be one thing or more than one. You've got no choice. So let's look at this. Let's look at this. Let's look at this. I'll make a statement. I have to blow my nose again. I'm sorry. Okay, I'll make a simple statement. I have a thermos. Okay, where to get it? I have a thermos. I've got to get it off. And a mala. I'll make a statement. I've got a thermos and a mala. Now, without analysis, as I say that, you're looking at this second, you're seeing these shapes and colors, you're hearing the words I say, and you're quickly putting it all together, aren't you? And you're relieved to check Robina's right. She has a mala and a thermos. Now, if I said I have an elephant in my right hand, you'll feel sorry for me. So you've just proved quickly by using your logic, you've proved what I said is true. Now, if it is a true statement, it is very evident that you have to point out three separate phenomena here. It's a complete no-brainer. So let's do it. We can do it easily. There's a thermos. There's a person here, Robina, that's a second phenomenon. And the third phenomenon that I mentioned is called mala. Now, if this is a true statement, even conventionally, you obviously have to point out three, in this case, simple, separate and independent phenomena. It's pretty obvious. So what does that mean? Independent in this context means they don't depend upon each other for their existence. So that's a simple statement, and you can prove it. My mala will break and my cup is fine. Robina will drop dead, the thermos will exist perfectly. So that's proving they're both separate and independent, and it's a simple example. Now we'll do a slightly more nuanced example, which is the point now. I'll tell you another evident truth, and you listen to this, you'll prove it quickly it's true, but I'll make a statement, I have a nose and an ear. Now, you know that's true, you can see it. There's the nose and there's the ear. So now, but Buddha says there's already a massive mistake built into that statement. This is where we get to the problem. There's a massive misconception built into that statement. Because if it is a true statement, you first have to establish how many phenomena were mentioned, how many nouns. Well, there's one pronoun and two nouns. Ear is a noun, and we can point to it. Easy. Nose is a noun, and we can point to it. Now, we have to point to precisely a phenomenon, listen to this, that isn't the ear, that is not the nose, that is separate from and independent of the nose, the ear, the eye, the head, and all the other pieces. That's what we mean by I. So Buddha is saying you have to point, if it's true, you have to point out that phenomenon that is separate and independent from the others, if it's a true statement conventionally. Well, that's what we have to do, to search for it. Because Buddha says we believe there is one there. We never pointed it out. We've never seen it. We've never heard it. We've never met it. But we have an absolute, rock-solid, Mount Everest big belief that there is one in there, and that's the basis of all our suffering since the beginning of this time. There's still a subtler understanding, but this is a grosser one, a good example. So he says we need to search for it. If it does exist, he said, you'll find it pretty easy. This is like hilarious to us. What a joke, you know. Now let's look at some of the consequences of this belief. Because we say it. We say, I have a nose. David insults my nose. Don't you dare insult me, I'll say. You know, I have a hand. I did this. I am not that. The I is our central player. And so this is the interesting point. When you say a word, a valid cognition is a word or a thought that has a valid object. Ear is the term for this phenomenon. There it is. You just made it. It's a valid cognition. That's a valid cognition. Ear, you point to it. There it is, right there, object. Noun, the subject is mind and the object is what it cognizes. Boom, simple. Ear, nose, simple. Now we get confused about the I. So we have two mistakes, Buddha says. We either think there is a separate I, which I pointed out, we'll go into this one, or we say, well, no, all of me is my I. So we've got to look at the logic arguments with both of those misconceptions, because they're misconceptions. We've got to look at both of these, you know. So let's argue with the first one. Let's see how it's foolish to believe there is a separate I in there. Let's look how there isn't one and we don't need one. This is very shocking to our ears. Okay, we'll do a little of that. We'll go to IKEA, okay? I love this example. We're using it lately. We'll go to IKEA, all right? And we're going to we look up the computer and we see there's a nice person called David or Robina, whatever you like, your own person, and you decide you're going to buy one of them. Now, we know very well you go to IKEA, you're going to get a box of bits. You'll get a box of bits, of parts. Everything that's existing, Buddha says, this is an amazing, massive, big argument in Buddhist philosophy. Everything that exists consists of parts, of components, of bits and pieces. It's a major argument because this is arguing with the Buddhist, a previous view that there is a phenomenon that is partless and doesn't have a cause. And that's what Buddha's arguing with, the gross one here, that you can't find such a thing. So, okay. Now, this is a kind of funny one, but it's a good one. Think of it carefully. In that IKEA box, we know IKEA people have been very intelligent. They don't just, if you buy a table, they don't just chuck in a few legs and 5 screws and cross their fingers. They are very precise. You'll get the exact right legs, the exact number of screws, and you'll put it together and da-da-da-da, you've got a lovely table. The same with David or Robina. You'll order a Robina, and this is the point now. You open the box, and there are going to be millions of parts. This is really obvious. If you start analyzing all the parts that make up a person, we've got 2 main parts, body and mind. Then, speaking simply, then you look at the body, you can see you've got hundreds, thousands of little bits and pieces. I mean, it would take a long time to construct a person based on the body. Think of the bits and pieces, all the ligaments and the nerves and the blood and the pee-pee and the caca and the intestine and the heart and the liver and the this and the that, hundreds of tiny bits. I mean, it's like a joke, but think about it. Now, logically, you want to get a beautiful piece that comes out at the other end, like your table. You put it all together according to the instructions. So you keep putting the bits and pieces together. You keep picking up this, and there's a leg and the right leg and the left leg and the big toe and the second toe and the fingers. And slowly it's taking shape as a Robina. Now, what you're going to be looking for rather desperately by now, you're looking for this very, 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 very special part that you think there won't be a Robina until you found it. And that piece is called I. Self. But you won't find that piece there. And you know what? This is Buddha's point, and this is the analysis we have to do. You will function fine. All the parts will do magnificently. They will fulfill the function of Robina without a special secret, little special inherent intrinsic piece called Robina. You don't need a little piece like that. This seems hilarious to us because we assume there has to be in here somewhere. The Greeks call it an essence. The Christians call it a soul. The Hindus call it an Atman. A real thing that does exist on top of your body, on top of your mind. Buddha says, don't be ridiculous. Now, before we haven't finished the argument yet. So, okay, let's look at the false assumption we have and the absurd consequence of that. If there is an I in here, among all these parts, a special piece, it means it's not the nose. and it's not the ear. It's a separate piece. And that's how we feel. Well, if there were that piece, and it's called I, and it's in there somewhere, you believe that, and then the ear gets broken. The ear is full of pain. The ear is bleeding and it's really a lot of pain. The nose is not affected. The nose is looking on going, oh, wow, phew, I'm glad it's not me. The nose is fine. The nose is still breathing. There's no pain in the nose. Well, there'll also, if there's a separate eye, the eye will be going, phew, I'm glad it's not me. I'm not feeling any pain. The poor old nose, look at it. If it were separate. But we say, I am in pain. And that's a valid discussion. I am in pain. But what's the I then? Well, there is an I. There is an I, but not separate. And absolutely not independent. So in this case, the I, so the other example before, they're both separate and independent. But here, there is an I that is not the nose and is not the ear, but it does exist. But it's utterly dependent, but you can't pin it down. It's a more tricky, more nuanced type of interdependent. It's an interdependent phenomenon. Look at this one, even more simple. It's exactly the same point. I will say my thermos has a base. Thermos is one noun, base is another. Now, if that is a correct statement, you have to point out two separate phenomena. So what am I going to do? I will cut out the base. And I will take the base away and I'll say, there's the thermos base. Well, first of all, actually, it's not a thermos base, it's just a part. But where is the thermos? What happened to the thermos? A thermos exists in dependence upon a base, but you can't separate the thermos from the base because you don't have a thermos there. You now have a piece of you now have a pipe. There is no such thing as a thermos without a base. So thermos does exist, but in dependence upon the base. So Robina does exist, but interdependently, dependent upon all the parts, but you can't find a separate Robina. This is the kind of thinking we have to do. And the other argument is, well, it's all me. Well, if it's all me, then, you know, let's go right back to basics. Let's define our terms. We have to define our terms first. So if you want to know what a thermos is, you have to say what it is. You give a definition. The first part tells you its conventional characteristics. A flat-bottomed metal container. That's a good definition. And then you prove it by pouring the tea in it and keeping it for 2 hours and taking off the lid later, and you'll discover it fits its definition. The second part, sorry, that's the first part, the conventional characteristics. But what does it do? This is the crucial piece. What's its function? What does it mean, mummy? Mummy, what does it do? What's its meaning? What is its function? Well, sweetheart, it keeps my tea hot. Two parts of the definition. One, its conventional characteristics, and two, its meaning, its function, its job. So don't believe her. You have to prove it. She's got to pour the tea in, put the lid on, leave it for 2 hours. You come back and you see the tea is still hot. So you've proved that it does fulfill its function of keeping tea hot. Now you're beginning to validate the existence of a conventional thermos. Not just because you make it up, it's establishing it. Even further, she's got to make sure there's no other valid cognition in our society that contradicts that. Once we've established this, we tick the box, we all agree it's a thermos. Now we can discuss a thermos and how it exists ultimately. So if we say, all of me is I, that means you're saying your body is I and your mind is I. Now, first of all, let's just say the body. What's the definition? First of all, what's the definition of I? I is the name of the phenomenon, and its conventional characteristics are the I is made up of body and mind. We'll say it like that: it's made up of body and mind. A valid person has got body and mind. A person that's just the body with no mind, that's not a person, it's a dead piece of flesh. So you could argue, like this is a flat-bottomed metal container, then the conventional characteristics, ordinarily speaking, of a person is they've got a body and mind. That's it. That's what a person is. Now listen to this. A person has a body and a mind. Now you say, well, my body is the I. Well, what's the definition of I? A definition or the characteristics of an I is a body and mind. So the body is also I. Make up your mind, please. You just said the definition of a person has a body and a mind. Well, how can also be body synonymous with I? They're two separate definitions. Body, another definition of another word called body, is made up of its kind of parts. A body is not an I. A body is a part of an I. So how can be a body be an I? They're two separate definitions. As Lama Zopa says, the label I can't be the base, can't be the body and mind. They're all different phenomena. One phenomenon is called I, one phenomenon is called body, and another phenomenon is called mind. They're separate phenomena. They're different phenomena. Independent phenomena. They're different. So you've got to analyze like this, which seems to us like silly. The reason we use this precise analysis is to argue with ego's views that are embedded in our mind with no logic whatsoever. There's no basis to them. They're made up nonsense, is what Buddha's saying. Is that a hand, David? Or just stretching your hand? Okay, I understand. So, okay, this is like hilarious sort of arguments and things. This is the type of thinking we have to do to try to prove that there is no peace in there called an I. But this is not the final argument yet. There's still more work to do. So a question then, if we do the IKEA analysis and really do it carefully and really imagine constructing a person with all the pieces of the body, all the pieces of the mind. And this is the point with the pieces, like I said before about the table. When you make a table of parts, each part is really specific and each part has its perfect job to do. Think of this. Each part of that table has to work beautifully with each other part. It's so logical. They've got to be utterly working together interdependently to fulfill the function of a table. Look at your hand. My hand holds a thermos. This is truth. But what is my hand made of? 5 digits. Each of them does their job beautifully. There's no argument. My pinky won't argue with my thumb saying, you're doing my job, go away. They each have their own function. This is the analysis we have to do depending on arising. So now listen to this if that's the case. If you look in that box, IKEA, and you're desperate to find the piece called I, but you think there won't be one until you put the piece in, like the switch that turns you on. I want to know what job it will have, please. If all the other parts do their job, if intention does its job and anger does its job and attachment does its job and love does its job and discrimination does its job and the hand does its job and the foot does its job, they've all got their jobs assigned and they all put together and they'll work impeccably as a Robina. So which job is left over for this precious little part called I that's feeling all left out? Well, Buddha tells you there isn't a job to be done because you don't need a stupid separate bit. But we believe the answer is we believe it's the boss. If you want a boss, honey, it's your mind. Which part of your mind? Intention, volition. It's there every millisecond. I will this, I do that. That's the boss. There's no I, there's no need for one. And this is the same philosophical argument as there being no creator. The concept of a creator is a boss that runs the parts of the universe. The concept of a self is the boss that runs the parts of the body and the mind. No, don't need one, Buddha says. This is his radical view. It sounds quite nihilistic, but it's not nihilistic. There is an I, but not separate and utterly interdependent. But you can't pin it down. This sounds very tricky to us. And as Lama Zopa says, when you've realized these two truths, when you've realized ultimately there's not a millisecond of anything in here that is I, he says, when you realize that, it's as if there's no I. But there is conventionally an I. But what does exist is so subtle. It is as if it doesn't exist. So these two truths are really, they come together. And when you finally got these together, that's the real middle way. That's the real middle way when the true truths of conventional and ultimate are cognized simultaneously in the mind of a Buddha. So the two truths are proof of the other. They're the flip sides of a coin. Right now we have the two extreme views. When we hear empty, we hear nothing. When we hear dependent arising, we hear something. We're too extreme. So once we start to understand even intellectually that these point to each other, we are on the right track. That's what Chandragurti says. That's what Tsongkhapa says. So now you need to ask me some questions. Come on. If you'd like. If not, that's just fine.
Does it have to be on emptiness?
What, darling? Who's asking? Where is that?
Does it have to be on emptiness?
I can't understand the verb you're saying.
Does the question have to be on emptiness?
Oh, no, anything you like. Sorry, Kenny.
Okay. Because emptiness makes me want to it feels like I'm sticking pins in my eyes when people.
I know, I understand, darling. I understand that. Ask whatever you like, sweetheart. It's okay.
I've done some chaplaincy, and there's always sometimes, I'm in a place that's not so nice, and a guy's sitting in a wheelchair,
Yeah,
and he can't get out. He's
Yeah.
sitting waiting to pass. And
that's
he
right.
said to me, I don't want to live anymore. I never know what to fucking say. I don't. What's the Buddhist answer for that?
So you dealing with people like this every day?
I did chaplaincy for a while.
Okay. So what?
struggled with
Okay, Kenny. Okay, let's just put it the other way around. I don't know. I think when a person's in, this is okay. Okay. Compassion is empathy with the person suffering, and you understand that, right?
Yeah, sure.
You have that. But wisdom is knowing, is there something I can do to help? So that's the key. Now, if you have the ability to get that person out of a wheelchair, to make them healthy, then honey child, I bet you'll do it. But if you don't have that ability, then you have to rely upon whatever you've got. And you've got nothing more than your big heart, nothing more than your love and your kindness, and to listen to that human being, get them to know that you hear them, and to show that you have empathy and love. There's nothing more you can do, Kenny. And that even might not help. Because in other words, we have to accept that there's sometimes nothing we will do will help. You have to accept that. But attachment in us, Kenny, attachment in us is desperate. We can't bear the thought that there's nothing we can do. We feel guilty, we feel overwhelmed, we feel hopeless. But we have to recognize sometimes there is something we can do, and often the best you can do is be loving and sympathetic and kind of let this person to hear your presence there, that you see them and hear them. And even that little bit of love can lift their heart. Even that's the only thing you can do sometimes.
Yeah, because sometimes the prognosis is not good.
That's right, of course. Of course. We've got to look at why, Kenny, we are so desperate. You see, when we've got masses of attachment in this case works that we are desperate. You see, attachment in us, if we were to isolate the attachment, is this little junkie in us that is frantic to have only the good things. So the attachment in us is this neediness, is our own personal junkie, our own personal distress that only wants nice things. So that attachment is mortally offended when it sees a person in a wheelchair dying with despair and misery and sickness and nothing to look forward to. Attachment in us can't stand it. That's why we wish it would all just go away. But if we've got less attachment and more love and compassion, we won't get disturbed by it. And then we can be authentic, and then we can be loving, and then we can be kind and do whatever we can, and it won't drag us down, Kenny. What drags us down is our attachment and our aversion, but it's embedded and it pollutes the compassion.
Yeah, I've spent 2 years kind of struggling with that.
Do you hear me though? Do you understand the logic?
Yes, because I it's hard for me to. Yeah, I want them to heal and all that kind of stuff, and you got to let go of all that bullshit.
That's attachment. Yeah. You just got to love them for who. But also the point is, Kenny, if we start in Buddhist teachings in grade 1 entry level, we learn about impermanence. You see, part of the one of the lies in our mind is wanting everything to be nice things to last forever. We can't bear the thought that things might change. So that's also the lie in our mind. So when we've lessened our grasping at things as permanent, when we've lessened our attachment junkie wanting everything to be lovely, we'll have much more courageous mind, much more steady, much more reasonable. We'll understand that impermanence is natural. And then when you have the Buddhist view of death, you'll know that any little thing you can do for that person to help them be a bit optimistic, to let them hear a prayer, that will benefit them. We do what we can. But if we have lots of attachment, lots of anger, lots of anxiety, lots of grasping at permanence, we'll be exhausted after one day, Kenny. We won't help a fly.
Because it's, I used to work in a place there was like 1,000 people there. They said it was 1,000 sad stories.
There you go. Exactly. That's the point. And that's when compassion, that's why Dalai Lama says compassion is not enough. It's got to be compassion based on wisdom. And wisdom is what you get when you get rid of the delusions and the self-centeredness and all this, our own junk that we bring into it.
You're giving me something to grasp onto. That's
what?
You're giving me something to grasp onto, to let go of this idea of, just be as helpful as you can be. That's all
we can do, Kenny. We've got to accept that reality. That's why I learned a lot by going to people in prison. I could not give them a key. I could not change their situation. I could not do that, but I could be buoyant, optimistic, kind, loving, respectful, and give them methods that they could use for their mind. That's what I could do. And that's the best I can do.
All right. Thank you.
You understand? Everybody's suffering, Kenny.
It was exhausting
Exactly right.
because I didn't have my head straight on.
Exactly. Yeah. What is there anything there, Teresa? Anything in the chat?
Yes, there's a question from Antonio. How would you say music, especially improvisational, non-composed, as an intangible phenomena exist?
It's the object of sound. First of all, it's a phenomenon. Everything that exists in the universe, you have to label it and name it, like I said before. And what we're describing here, whether it's Bach's music or, or in whatever you just said, improvisation, it's just mere sound. It's mere, in the object itself that the ear consciousness can cognize. The senses are profoundly limited in their capacity for cognition. So bare bones, when I look at that, and I will say what a really nicely designed thermos, there's a whole bunch of things happening. The first is my eye consciousness sees it. And my eye consciousness is, the sensory consciousnesses are like dumb animals. The eye consciousness can only cognize two things, shape and color. So where is a nicely designed thermos coming from? That's in my mental consciousness. That's where the thoughts are, feelings, emotions, ideas, viewpoints, So that's what then, based on my taste, my memories, and I make up this conceptual story, it is a well-designed thermos. So your statement there, that sound, which is improvisational, no structure, no anything, that's a conceptual story that you impose upon that sound that your ear consciousness hears. Ear consciousness can only hear sound. When I hear that one trumpet and I go bliss out, that's Miles Davis. Sound is the object of my ear consciousness. That music you're describing is the object of your ear consciousness. The rest is a story made up by your mental consciousness. So the phenomenon itself is mere sound. That's it. The rest is a label you use to describe that sound. Divine Miles Davis, whatever it might be. Are we communicating? Whoever asked that question, answer me. Who asked it? Antonio.
I did, yes. Thank
So
you.
far from that, so what's your next question as a result of that? What's your next bit? Any more questions from that?
No, I mean, I wonder if it's the same point of view if you are at the instrument or listening to someone.
Sorry, what, Antonio, say it again, what? If what?
I'm wondering if it's the same point of view if you're playing, if you're improvising actively on the instrument, or when you're listening to someone doing this.
No, and they're completely different experiences, aren't they? I mean, first of all, we've got to analyze what the object is. Mind is existing every second, and every moment of your mind is having a particular cognition, and each of those cognitions has an object. So your ear consciousness cognizes sound. That will be exactly the same whether I'm listening or you're playing. We'll both be cognizing sound, but we'll also both be making up a story in our own mental consciousness that interprets that sound. Maybe I hate that sound, and I'll call it ugly, horrible sound, because I have one interpretation, and you have another interpretation. So speaking more like that, they're obviously different experiences, but that's the way to break down what's going on from the mental point of view and from the point of view of what the mind is cognizing.
Right. I see. Thank you.
Is that helpful or answering your point or no? Not quite.
Yes, you did. Thank you so much.
You did good. Fantastic. Go on, people. And this is the point about emptiness now, Antonio. This is the point. As Buddha's saying, if you're very attached to your sounds, let's say you create those sounds, and we all are usually attached to what we create. Of course we are. So if you create some music, whether it's, whatever kind of music it is, maybe just a loud, cow horn or another articulate piece of clever music, either way, what's in your mind, clearly okay, if you notate that music, if you do make a creation of like Bach's music, it's very sophisticated notation, isn't it? That's all coming from your mental consciousness, your capacity, your clever conceptual mind, which includes attachment, which is an ability to embellish sound, and your cleverness and your concentration, all the bits of your mind all work together to create a really elaborate notation. That's intelligence. Then that's mental consciousness. And then when you play those clever notations on the piano, out comes a sound, and that sound is heard by the ear, but then the interpretation of it, whether you think it's delicious, someone else will think it's disgusting, that's where you have all the labels we put on top. But then you start to analyze, just like the person, where is the independent existing, where's the intrinsic actual good music, bad music? Then you do the analysis and you will not find it, just like we did before. It also is made of parts, but then it's all interpreted, and then we make it all up from our mind. So that's another level of emptiness that I haven't even talked about yet, which is the final one, that everything is made by the mind, everything is interpreted by the mind, everything is constructed by the mind, everything is labeled by the mind. And in that analysis, you won't find anything intrinsic either. That's another whole discussion as well. What else, people? Anybody?
Thank you.
Nothing in the
Chat.
but I have a couple questions that are coming up. One is would you define ego as the separate self? Are those synonyms?
It's hard to say because we use that word in the West, don't we? It's just a Greek word for I, and we use it in the West. You know, when they say self in Buddhism, they're referring to conventional self, which does exist, and inherent self, which doesn't exist. So it's a very precise analysis. But the way we loosely use the word in the West, it seems to me, when we say ego, we're referring to arrogance and an overstated sense of yourself. So that you could argue is an exaggerated, deluded self. Of course, it has no intrinsic existence either. What else? Nothing there?
No, I have another one, a quick one to ask if
sure.
I don't see anything else here.
Good, Colin, good.
So then, is Buddha nature the most subtle consciousness? Like it's I know what it is, but I'm trying to frame it within this conversation of emptiness.
Give me your definition if you know what it is.
Of Buddha nature?
Mm-hmm. What's the definition? You said you know what it is. I just want to know what you think it is.
Oh, well, I think that it's the clear state of mind beyond all the delusions that occurs. So there's my mind started equating it to like this most subtle consciousness.
No, Buddha nature is not that. It doesn't refer to that at all. Buddha nature is the potential to be a Buddha. It's very precise. So you could say an acorn is a seed that if you put it in the ground and give it a time and a few conditions, it'll produce an oak tree, won't it? Do you agree with that? So then you could argue an acorn possesses oak tree nature. So oak tree nature is the potential of an acorn once it's given all the conditions that will eventually manifest as an oak tree. So the acorn is the simple seed that will produce the oak tree, and the oak tree nature is the potential of the oak tree when it's given the conditions to become the oak. So it's quite a separate phenomenon. They're two separate, you know, each word is its own phenomenon. So Buddha nature, you can talk about, we don't talk this way. We don't say acorns possess oak tree nature, but when we say it, we'll get the meaning. So Buddha's saying Mahayana, every mind that exists possesses Buddha nature. So every mind that exists just naturally, by definition, when it's given the appropriate conditions, will turn into a Buddha. So that potential is referred to as Buddha nature. Do you understand? It's an abstract concept. You can't point out a thing called Buddha nature. It's actually Buddha nature is empty. The actual Buddha nature is emptiness. The actual thing that causes us to become a Buddha is emptiness, the emptiness of our mind. The absolute Buddha nature is the emptiness of our mind. So Buddha nature is our potential. So in the same way, we know that what an acorn is, this is a good example, thank you. So by definition, what defines the very existence of an acorn is its potential to become an oak tree. Now, this is what's interesting. If we use the analogy for us being humans, what defines us is our potential to become Buddha. But if we look at ourselves as a human, the way limited view we have of ourselves, it's like we're an acorn, and what we think an acorn is this little kind of whatever that shape is with a little hat on it. And we spend our lives trying to make the nicest shape and smooth out the wrinkles and change the hats every day and be the happiest acorn. I mean, Buddha says, what a pathetic idea. It's kind of limited. If you look at an acorn, you'd never imagine in a million years, if you hadn't learned botany, that when you look at an acorn and look at an oak tree, you'd never see a relationship between them. So our view of concrete, self-existent, real, solid, definite human me, the best we think is I'll be a good carpenter. I'll be a nice, smooth human with no wrinkles and a nice hat on my head, and then I'll die. That's a nihilistic view of who we are. That's limited. We are a human. We have 2 arms and 2 legs, maybe if we're fortunate, but that's not what defines us. What defines us is our potential to be Buddha. That's kind of tasty. So we've got to look at what our potential is. And that potential exists in our mind, not in our body. So Buddha nature is our potential that Buddha has found is the natural potential of every living consciousness. Every Hitler, every Mother Teresa, every monk, every Mr. Trump, every hell being, naturally, by their very existence, possesses this potential. So conventional Buddha nature is the job, is like the process of doing it, of accomplishing it. But ultimate Buddha nature is empty, the emptiness of your mind. Because finally, why something exists is because it has no intrinsic nature, which means it's a dependent arising. So this is back to emptiness now. The way His Holiness says is so tasty. This is getting to the subtlest meaning. And also let's look into this word emptiness, which really throws us. As His Holiness says, the I isn't empty of intrinsic existence because you can't find it. And we've done that analysis so far. That's not the real premise. This gets us to the subtlest one. The I is empty of intrinsic nature because it is a dependent arising. So that's just that statement. And that gets us to the subtlest meaning of emptiness, which is that everything is merely labeled. That's the ultimate, that's the subtle dependent arising. And the real emptiness is finally that everything, there's no thermos here. There's nothing in this thermos that makes it a thermos, that it is coming from the mind, which doesn't mean there's no thermos. Emptiness doesn't deny conventional reality. Emptiness doesn't deny function. My thermos has not an atom of intrinsic character. It's merely labeled a thermos, but nevertheless, it continues to hold my tea hot as we decided. So emptiness reinforces existence. It doesn't deny existence. And once we get that, the 2 truths are coming together for us. So also the 2 truths are done beautifully. I think we'll finish the day with doing the Heart Sutra. The 2 truths are expressed beautifully in the Heart Sutra. This is really where we don't fall into the abyss of the great mistake. So in the Heart Sutra, Buddha's sitting there, like I mentioned, he's sitting there blissing out in meditation, and he's cognizing these things, and he's channeling his thoughts into the minds of Avalokitesvara, 10th level Bodhisattva, and Shariputra. So they're having a discussion. Shariputra asks the question, and then the rest of the sutra is Avalokitesvara answering the question. But basically it's Buddha speaking through Avalokitesvara. So what it is in the Heart Sutra is just a list of all the different categories of phenomena that the universe is made up of. So, the first lot is the 5 aggregates: no form, no feeling, no recognition, no volition, no consciousness. The next lot is the 18 constituents, which is the 6 senses, meaning the 6 sense consciousnesses plus mental consciousness. Then the next 6 are the 6 elements, or there's a subtle physical energy that each of those senses is connected with. And the next 6 is the objects of those senses. That's the 18 constituents. Then it's the 4 Noble Truths and the 12 links and blah, blah, blah. So all the categories of phenomena, and what Avalokitesvara is saying through Buddha's wisdom, that each one is empty of existing from its own side. And we have to realize that by repeatedly thinking through this. So basically the Heart Sutra is spoken from the experience of a yogi realizing emptiness directly. So now, first we'll hear Avalokitesvara say, form is the first of the 5 aggregates, okay? Aggregates is just this sutra that Buddha taught, where he broke down into 5 components, the pieces of a person. And there's got particular logic to all those, but never mind that here. So the first is called form, which is really just describing the physical. So Avalokitesvara says, form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. Form is nothing other than emptiness, and emptiness is nothing other than form. So this is where he's presenting the utter inextricable connection between the two truths, that you can't have one without the other. And that's when we're on the right track with the two truths. So right now we hear something is empty, we hear there's nothingness, then we hear something does exist interdependently, and we hear somethingness. So for us, they're like contradictions. So what does he mean by form is emptiness, emptiness is form, emptiness is nothing other than form, and form is nothing other than emptiness? Well, the simplest way to put it is that emptiness of intrinsic existence is a generality. But if you want to, no, okay, black is a generality. You can say black exists, can't we? We can say that because we know it, because we've seen black in the past. That's a generality, is a general statement of truth. Black does exist. But if we want an experience, a direct experience of black, we know we need a phenomenon that has the characteristic of being black. So that's a thermos. Right? So you could argue very simply, wherever there is a thermos, there is the characteristic of black. And in this case, wherever there is the characteristic of black, there is a thermos. And then black is thermos, thermos is black. Black is nothing other than thermos, and thermos is nothing other than black. You could say that without being complicated. We know black generally, yes, but black specifically has to be a characteristic of something that exists. So emptiness of inherent existence is a characteristic. In general, emptiness of inherent existence exists. That's a general statement. But if you want to have an experience of emptiness of inherent existence, you have to have the experience of the emptiness of inherent existence of something. So in this case, person. Or form, but change the word to person, change the word to I. So there is a phenomenon called I. There's a phenomenon called thermos. There's a characteristic called black that is a characteristic of that thermos. So you can't separate that black from the thermos, and you can't separate the thermos from the black. Well, you've got an I, which is a conventional person, a conventional phenomenon, and that phenomenon, its main characteristic that's with it is its emptiness of intrinsic existence of that person. So wherever you find conventional person, you will find the emptiness of intrinsic person. And wherever you find emptiness of intrinsic person, you will find conventional person. So person is emptiness. Emptiness is person. Person is nothing other than emptiness, and emptiness is nothing other than person. You can't separate them. You can't separate black from thermos. You can't separate emptiness of inherent existence from the person, and you can't separate the person from the emptiness of inherent existence of the person. So that's that meaning there. So you never fall into the abyss of the great mistake when you start to get that, because emptiness is a characteristic of something that exists, not some absolute nothingness. That's how we hear it. We hear it as an absolute nothingness, that you chuck out all the bits and you've got nothing left. Oh, nothingness. That's nihilism, and it is not the meaning of emptiness. So emptiness, the word, let's look at the word. Of course, it's abstract to us. It sounds like nothingness. You can be forgiven for thinking it means nothingness, but it's a shorthand. But we use it in daily life. I use this all the time. We use it in daily life. I'll go to drink my thermos and I go, oh, it's empty. We'll say that, won't we? But we know perfectly well it means of tea. You look in your bank account. Oh my God, it's empty. You know perfectly well it's empty of your precious $5,000. You go into, I've lived with David for 49 years, and I come home and there's a note saying I've left you for a younger version. For many months, the only main thing I'll see in that house is the emptiness of David. Think of this. Because I expect David. Why is my cup empty of tea? Because I expect tea. Why is my bank empty? It's because I expect $5,000. So it doesn't mean there's nothing there. It means there's a lack of $5,000. So nothing being there and the emptiness of $5,000 are completely separate phenomena. Nothingness is nothingness. It's like nihilism. But emptiness of an intrinsic I is a very specific lack. No person in the house is nihilism, but a lack of David is coming from a conceptual mind that is wishing David were there. Empty of tea is only because, you go into a shop where you buy cups, you will not say, oh, mummy, there's no tea in the cups. You won't say, oh, mummy, the cups are empty, because you don't expect tea. You don't look at, you see so the absence of $5,000 is not nothingness. The absence of David is not no person. The absence of intrinsic I is not no I. It's the absence of what you thought was there. So the best absence to talk about is if you think you've got cancer. The doctor tells you you've got cancer. You're young, you're beautiful, you're vibrant, you're in the middle of your life, you've got 7 kids, you've got a divine husband, and of course you have a panic attack and you're distressed and you're going crazy and you're coming to terms with this terrible loss. You believe in the presence of cancer, totally. All your fears and dramas happen as a result of it. Then you go to the doctor and she made a mistake. I gave you the wrong x-rays, Robina. You got no cancer, baby. Now, let's pretend you never thought you had cancer. Let's pretend you never thought you had cancer. You never noticed it. You couldn't care less. But now, because you thought you had cancer, suddenly you realize that what does exist in your body is not cancer, but is the absence of cancer. The absence of cancer. You'll be blissed out when you realize the absence of cancer, when you realize the emptiness of cancer, because you thought cancer was there. You lived in fear and dramas because of believing in cancer, but you've discovered the miracle of the absence of cancer. So when you discover for the first time in the depth of your meditation, directly, clearly, nakedly, the absence of what you thought was there since beginningless time, a real I. When you realize that absence, that's the realization of emptiness. So you don't just go, oh, there's no I, nihilism. You realize the emptiness of that specific one. So it's not nihilism. And it proves dependent arising, because the I still exists and it does function. But as Lama Zopa says, it's as if it doesn't exist. It's the two truths together. It's very subtle, very precise, and very important to get right to. First, intellectually, as His Holiness says, the I is not empty of intrinsic existence because you can't find it. And I'm adding this, and you can't find it. But that's not the real premise. It's empty of intrinsic existence because finally it's a dependent arising. And they say when you finally realize the emptiness of your own intrinsic I, you then realize subtle dependent arising, merely labeled. Then you're on the right track. That's when you realize after you've realized emptiness. That's how they talk. I'm just quoting words that I've learned, that I think are delicious. Okay? Got to squeeze our brains. Any questions? Yes. Yes, Kenny.
I was just thinking numerically 0 is a good, numbers are always good to make examples. 0 is a number that has no real value. But you can't.
I know, but that's nihilism. Here, that's nihilism. That's
no,
not
no, but you can't have 1 without 0, so it does exist.
Which one?
The 0, you can't have 1 without 0.
I understand. So then?
The 0 is empty because it has to be there.
I see. I hear it, but I'm wondering if it's trying to help me realize emptiness. But it's an interesting point. I'll think about it. Good, Kenny. Thank you.
Numerically.
No, I understand. I hear you.
You can't have 1 without 0.
I understand.
0.
No, I hear your point. It's a very interesting point. I'll think about it. Thank you. Good
Sorry.
one. Thank you. No, thank you. Great. What else, people? Any questions?
I have a question.
Yeah. Go, darling. Definitely.
What about the continuum consciousness that goes from life to life and the emptiness of it?
Yeah. What about it? What's the question?
My question is, will karma be then the parts that constitute, like, or give the inherent existent or the dependent arising for that?
I don't understand the question, darling. Ask it in another way.
I'm just trying to analyze the emptiness of the continuum consciousness.
Okay, so you wanted, so it's the same discussion. First, you establish there is such a thing as a consciousness. You label it, you define it conventionally, and then you begin to look for the intrinsic consciousness among those parts. It's the same discussion as the phenomenon called I. Just the same discussion. So it happens to be continuum, the mind, you know, is beginningless and endless, but it's impermanent and it has no intrinsic nature. And that's what Mahamudra meditation is all about, how to find the emptiness of your own mind. It's a very delicious meditation to do. Lama Yeshe's book is all about that.
Can I just ask a question, Robina?
Yes, darling. Yes, darling.
Yes, so if I could just to understand, well, so that emptiness means, for instance, that all of my confusion, delusions, projections, that everything, it's because we're seeing something out of attachment that really doesn't exist intrinsically.
Yeah, so there's different levels. There's different levels, Eileen. Wait, I'll tell you. So we've got all these different states of mind in our mind. We've got all these different delusions. We've got attachment and anger and jealousy, all the different branch delusions. And then you have the root delusion. So all of these delusions, all of them individually, all embellish something. So
Yes.
Attachment embellishes deliciousness. Anger embellishes ugliness. Ego grasping the root delusion embellishes intrinsic existence. Intrinsic delicious, intrinsic ugly. It adds an extra component to the attachment and ugly. Or, you know, pride exaggerates your importance. Low self-esteem exaggerates your bad qualities. Ignorance informs all of those and makes those characteristics set in stone. But they all, in general, exaggerate. So when you realize emptiness, you would say, for sure, you have removed from your mind utterly and completely all those delusions. So the delusions being removed is a result of your seeing the truth, that there never has been anything intrinsic this or intrinsic that.
Thank you.
Is that okay? Is that right?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Good. Thanks, darling. What else, people? Anything else? Anything else? Anything else? Anything else? Nothing. Okay, early. We've still got time. We can read the Heart Sutra. Yeah. There's so many more things we could talk about. Just talked about a few things, you know. This is so again, the point is this. The Buddha's saying we're driven. We've got a mind, okay? In this mind, we have lots of deluded, neurotic, disturbing, exaggerating, distorted, distressing concepts, some of which are deeply emotional because they're very habitual and the body's involved and they are deeply disturbing. But in general, all these misconceptions, there are layers and layers and layers and layers of these misconceptions, literally misconceptions that misconceive things both conventionally and even ultimately. He has found this. So he has found the method for identifying these delusions, distinguishing them from the valid states of mind, which are in sync with reality to some degree. And we can gradually argue with these misconceptions, step by baby step, unpacking, unraveling, ever more subtle, and proving to ourselves how they're liars, not just believing in them. That's not enough because they're so entrenched. So that's the whole level of what practice is. Gradually, you first control the servants of the mind, the body and speech, then you control the mind, and you keep doing that, and then you add compassion and love and everything to the mix. You grow and grow the valid states of mind, and then eventually in your meditation, you then unpack and unravel this subtlest lie. And when you've cut the subtlest lie, all the other lies crumble and have no basis whatsoever. So when you've cut the belief in the intrinsic me, you have cut fear, you have cut attachment, you've cut anger and all the others, because they're the branch delusions of the root delusions, and the root is gone, the branches crumble. So there is no longer there when you've really removed all the stuff from your mind. This is what he means by nirvana. And then you add bodhicitta to the mix, then you've got Buddhahood. It's a literal, gradual, psychological job to be done. Not mystical, not cross your fingers, not hope for the best, and not cosmic. It's psychology, just quite sophisticated psychology, I would suggest. That's it, you know. One step at a time. One step at a time. Let's read the Heart Sutra then. Maybe we can finish early or whatever. I was running out of voice. Let's read the Heart Sutra. You got it there, Teresa? Good job. We'll read it together.
Yes, I do. I can share my screen with it.
Good, sweetheart. We'll just read together. I'll read it, or you think about it and contemplate the meaning, or you read it with me as you wish. But I might just go slowly so we can contemplate, you know. So maybe you just contemplate the meaning. Just hear it, and don't try to squeeze your brain to make any sense of it. Just hear it. Putting Buddha's words into our mind is very precious, you know. So I'll just read it slowly and you meditate. Just let it go in. Just let it sink into your mind. But remember the scenario where in Vajragir, there's a little place called Vajra Peak, right up high, it's a small hill, you know, where Buddha used to meditate and give a lot of his teachings, and all these different beings are all there, all listening. And he's in meditation, but he's channeling his thoughts into the minds of his two disciples, Shariputra, and then the other one, Avalokitesvara, but not in the form of a Sambhogakaya, but in the form of a human, 10th level Bodhisattva. And they're having this conversation. I prostrate to the Arya triple gem. Thus did I hear at one time. The Bhagavan was dwelling on Massive Vulture's mountain in Rajagriha, together with a great community of monks and a great community of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Bhagavan was absorbed in the concentration on the categories of phenomena called profound perception. Also at that time, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, Arya Avalokitesvara, looked upon the very practice of the profound perfection of wisdom and beheld those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Apparently the also there is implying that this is just one category, that is all the other categories as well are empty of inherent nature. And remember, this whole discussion is from the perspective of a yogi who's meditating single-pointedly on emptiness. And then through the power of Buddha, the Venerable Shariputra said this to the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, Arya Avalokitesvara. How should any son of the lineage? The lineage, I don't know, they mean it's in a very particular way, like a group of, I don't know quite what they mean by lineage. Often they say the family there, but it's a bit confusing. How should any son of the lineage train who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom? He said that. And the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara said this to the Venerable Sharadvatiputra. Shariputra, any son of the lineage or daughter of the lineage who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom. So perfection of wisdom is immediately you hear that, you know it's the Bodhisattva path, the perfections of the Bodhisattva. And this is why wisdom, which is a Hinayana teaching, but it's taught in the framework of the Bodhisattva path in conjunction with the other perfections of the Bodhisattva. So who wishes to practice the activity of the profound perfection of wisdom should look upon it like this, correctly and repeatedly beholding those 5 aggregates also as empty of inherent nature. Form is empty, which means wherever you find form, you will find the emptiness of intrinsic form right there. So emptiness of intrinsic form is conventional form, meaning wherever you find the emptiness of intrinsic form, right there you will find it on the conventional form. So form is empty, and that emptiness is technically not form, but it's referring to that. It means you won't find it separate from, in that case, form, and therefore every other phenomenon in the universe is the same. So again, emptiness of intrinsic existence of form is nothing other than conventional form. And wherever you find conventional form, it is also nothing other than the emptiness of the intrinsic form. At the same time, feeling, discrimination, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. That's the other 4 aggregates. Shariputra, likewise, all phenomena are emptiness, without characteristic, unproduced, unceased. So that means without intrinsic characteristic, not intrinsically produced, not intrinsically ceasing, not intrinsically stainless, not intrinsically lacking stain, not deficient intrinsically, not fulfilled intrinsically or inherently or from its own side. All these are synonyms. Shariputra, therefore, in emptiness of intrinsic this or that, there is no form. And this is the experience of the yogi. In meditation, there is no form manifesting of any kind. They are having a direct cognition of the absence of intrinsic nature. That's what's appearing to the mind of the yogi. Therefore, within this experience of emptiness, there is no form, no feeling, no discrimination, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no I. That's the first five aggregates. Now the first set of the 18 constituents, the six senses. No eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body. And then mind, meaning mental consciousness. The first five are the sensory consciousness. Next, the objects of these six consciousnesses. No visual form, no sound, no odor, no taste, no object of touch, and then no phenomenon, meaning all the phenomena that the mental consciousness cognizes. And these are the subtle elements, they say, subtle physical energy that's there. We don't posit these in the Western world. There is no I element, and so on, up to and including no mind element and no mental consciousness element. There are now the 12 links. The 12 links, the dependent arising. There is no ignorance, no extinction of ignorance. So ignorance, there is no intrinsic ignorance, and there is also no intrinsic extinction of ignorance, and so on, up to and including no aging and death, and no intrinsic aging and death, and no intrinsic extinction of aging and death. Similarly, there is no suffering. The four noble truths. There is no suffering, no causes of suffering, no cessation of suffering, and no path to the cessation of suffering and its causes. There is no exalted wisdom, which is the wisdom that realizes emptiness, and there is no attainment of that wisdom. But also there is no non-attainment. So meaning there is no wisdom, there's no intrinsic wisdom that realizes emptiness. There's no intrinsic attainment of the realization of emptiness, but there's no emptiness of that intrinsic, there's no emptiness of intrinsic nature of that that emptiness. Even the emptiness is also empty of intrinsic existence, because emptiness is a phenomenon and it exists. So the emptiness itself is also empty of intrinsic existence. Shariputra, therefore, because there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and dwell in the perfection of wisdom, the mind without obscuration and without fear. Having completely passed beyond error, they reach the end point of nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times, past, present, and future, also manifestly, completely awaken to unsurpassable, perfect, complete enlightenment in reliance on the perfection of wisdom. Therefore, the mantra of the perfection of wisdom, the mantra of great knowledge, the unsurpassed mantra, the mantra equal to the unequaled, the mantra that thoroughly pacifies all suffering, should be known as truth, since it's not false. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is declared. Taya ta om gate gate, para samgate, bodhi svaha. Shariputra, the bodhisattva mahasattva, should train in the profound perfection of wisdom like that. Then the Bhagavan arose from that concentration and commended the Bodhisattva Mahasattva Arya Avalokitesvara, saying, well said, son of the lineage, it is like that. It is like that. One should practice the profound perfection of wisdom, just as you have indicated. Even the Tathagatas rejoice. The Bhagavan, having thus spoken, the venerable Sharadvatiputra, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, Arya Avalokitesvara, and those surrounding in their entirety, along with the world of gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, were overjoyed and highly praise that spoken by the Bhagavan. Okay. Thank you, people. Well, I think we're done. I think that's the end, really, don't you think?
Thank you so much, Venerable. There is a message that came through. Someone's asking if there is a way to contact you.
Yeah, sure. You give that person my email address, no problem.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Well, sweethearts, it's a bit early, but that'll do, I think. Okay, everybody. So hopefully we've found a bit about what suffering is at different levels and a bit about the solutions to that suffering. So one step at a time. Start with controlling your body and speech, then control your mind, then get bodhicitta, and then realize emptiness. And that's the path, babies. One step at a time. All the methodologies laid out. One step at a time, with confidence. Thank you, precious ones. Dang chub sem chogwen poche ma ke panam ke guchi ke panyam pa me pa yang gong ne gong du bhavasho wadin you do daglama sange du yone drova chikyang malupa de sala gopa shok. So what I said was, may compassion, bodhicitta grow and grow in the hearts of all. And all these seeds we planted this few days, they're not going astray. You might remember most of them, doesn't matter, but also these seeds, be so delighted. So we're going to nourish these seeds with our effort from this moment forward. This is the point. So they will grow and they will develop exactly as we motivated in our Buddhahood. So we can benefit others. So never give up, folks. That's the thing. Much love.
Thank you so much.
Thank you,
Venerable.
Verena. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We're so grateful to have you.
Grateful.
Thank you.
Can't wait to get back to the. Okay.